Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with a huge craft guide project. And in this project, I will be making some crafting guides where I'll teach you how to craft in Path of Exile. And I'm not referring how to try craft X or Y item, but rather how to actually craft in Path of Exile. And to do this, we need to cover some of the very basics in this initial video, which will be talking about item limitations and restrictions and different modifiers and affixes, and basically explaining the very basics, which is very important to understand before you take the next step in this guide series and go through the in-depth mechanical videos of how the different crafting methods actually work. So with that said, we will be utilizing the best crafting tool available to us in the game, which is the craftofexile.com website. Now, outside of this, I do want to stress the importance of clicking the written guide linked in the descriptions below, because sometime in the future, this video will become outdated. And when that happens, the written guide will always be kept up to date. So do check that one out. Now let's get into the video, and before we do so, I do want to point out that if you find this video or the series helpful, do consider subscribing to help out the channel, leave a comment or like the video, also supports the channel a lot, so thank you so much to each of you that does that. This guide will cover a lot, and I will try to make it as easy to learn as possible, so we will start with the different affixes or modifiers that can be on an item, what they mean and what restrictions or limitations they bring on an item, and we will also cover a bunch of minor extra things that I deem to be fundamental to understand before you go to the more advanced guides in this series. So we're going to start with implicit and synthesized implicit modifiers and what this means on an item. So we're looking at my in-game character, which is a Dark Pact build. We are currently wearing a 2-influenced 2-toned pair of boots. And first, we're going to talk about the anatomy of an item. So if you're looking at this item, you'll see on the top side, there is the name Apocalypse Slippers 2-tone boots. On the left-hand side, you'll see the Redeemer influence. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the Hunter influence. Now, this is very important to understand because of these synthesized items will have another modifier, basically an icon showing that it is synthesized. So we're going to start with the generic anatomy of an item. So first off, you'll see that the name and the different icons representing if it has an influence or not. For example, the Eldritch influence on the left hand, you have Searing Exarch. On the right hand, you have Soul Eater, or so Eater of Worlds, I mean. And we're going to look at these boots to try to explain the implicit modifiers in this. And the first modifier you'll see is a little bit of a teal lighter color that is saying 10% movement speed if you haven't been hit recently. This is called an enchant. The enchant has a line below it, and beneath that it says 11% to fire and lightning rest. That modifier is an implicit modifier, and all of the modifiers below that line is explicit modifiers. So that is the anatomy of an item, if you will. By holding down Alt, you can actually see a bit more information. At the very top, it doesn't say that it is an enchant, but the fire and lightning rest does say specifically that it is an implicit modifier. And below that, you'll see prefix modifier as well as suffix modifiers on the 6 different modifiers that is below the line. So that is the anatomy of an item, so you can verify what the modifiers are, where they come from, and what they do. Outside of this, we are going to be talking about the limitations on items itself. And this is getting a little bit more basic. I know most of you already know, but I'm going to show you either way. So I'm going to take a belt. We're going to do this, and I'm going to go to town, and I'm going to show you the limitations of items on these type of rarities of items. So here, for example, we have 2 different belts.
For freedom.
One belt is rare and one belt is magic. Now, the difference between these 2 belts is not much. The item level is 69 on both of them. They're both rustic sashes. The implicit value is a bit different. This one's 23, this one's 18. However, the limitations of what can and can't be applied on these items are very, very important to point out. I cannot benchcraft this specific magic item belt right now. The reason I can't do that is because magic items are limited to having only 1 prefix modifier and 1 suffix modifier. Rare items are limited to 3 prefix modifiers and 3 suffix modifiers. So what the hell are suffixes and prefixes, you might wonder? So basically, the suffixes and prefixes, they are the explicit affixes an item can have. The prefixes are the item that can roll specific modifiers, as we saw on Craft of Exile. So if we're going to search for, say, the rustic sash that we're looking at right now, we can go back here and we can look at rustic sash and look at this item. And you can see the prefix modifiers are these modifiers that can roll on the item. And these are the suffix modifier that can roll on the item with the limitations that's explained earlier of item level 69. Now, with this in mind, I can then verify that I cannot roll the tier 1 elemental damage with attacks, but I can actually roll the tier 3, giving me up to 36% as an example. However, my item can only have 3 of these modifiers, and I can only have 3 of these modifiers. That is the limitations between the rarities. If you hold down Alt over an item, you can see the prefix modifier is called Exciting, tier 3 mana flask recovery rate, and the suffix modifier is a tier 8 of the Bear, which is a plus 18 to 22 strength. Whereas my rare version actually has 3 suffix modifiers and 1 prefix. That means there's 2 prefix slots open. This is very important to understand when it comes to situations where you might want to add another modifier to the item through using an Exalted Orb, which would augment a rare item with a new random modifier, or if you do decide to benchcraft it if there's an open prefix or a suffix modifier, which you can clearly see in the benchcraft interface. The magic item can obviously be re-rolled with alterations. So, example, in this case, I only have a suffix modifier, and now you might see that if you look at the item name, it says Rustic Sash of Restocking. So the restocking is a tier 5 increased flash charges gained, but since it doesn't have any prefix, there is no name of that modifier before the Rustic Sash. Then I can use an Orb of Augmentation, which will augment the magical item with 1 new random modifier, which can be done if there's only 1 mod on it. So by doing this, I got a fortified, and that means that that is a fortified roll, which is a tier 5 flat armor gain. This obviously does not work on rare items. As you can see here, this one's called Wrath Shackle Rustic Sash, which is, despite it having 3 suffixes, it doesn't have a suffix name. But the suffix and prefix name actually applies to magical items. You can always turn this into a rare by using something like a Regal Orb, which will now turn it into a rare version, and now we got the name Bloodclasp, and now the name doesn't really matter anymore. But it's a good thing to point out and understand that magical items can only have 2 different modifiers, one being prefix and one being suffix, and rare item modifiers can be in the form of 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. There are very few exceptions to this rule, and they will be clearly stated on the items, such as the heist items, ring or amulet, I believe it is, amulet. So that is the limitations on magic versus rare items. The base item restrictions is another thing that needs to be brought up to speed as well. Even we're going to be looking at Wayland Roth's different available options, and we're going to take the Tower Shield, and we're going to look at a Spirit Shield. I'm going to use the Craft of Exile for this again. So if we look at a Tower Shield, for example, which we know is a strength-based shield, we can see that the mods that can roll on this is flat armor, it's percent armor, stun and block recovery, percent armor. There's a hybrid armor and life, there's socket and melee gems and life, and then there's a bunch of suffixes, normally in the form of resistances, block-oriented stats, and max resistances, attribute requirements, stun and block recovery, which is in most shields. However, if I were to compare this to a Spirit Shield, which is an intelligence-based shield, giving me energy shield and spell damage, this one does not have any armor rolls. Instead, the Spirit Shield in this example has the availability to roll energy shield and stun block recovery, but also cold damage, fire damage, lightning, and spell damage, as well as level of cold chaos, cold, fire, and lightning, and physical skill gems as well. So depending on the base item you're looking at, there will be different types of modifiers that can roll on that specific item. So, for example, the build that I'm currently showing in-game right now is a Dark Pact character. I'm looking for a lot of minion HP. I'm also looking for a ton of spell crit and spell damage. Therefore, the best shield for me to use would be an intelligence-based shield such as a Spirit Shield, preferably one that has a minion damage modifier, so I can roll minion modifiers on it. Whereas other builds would use something like a life recovery on block, for example, and having more armor would be more attractive for certain other builds. Many of those builds actually uses the unique surrender, but you can have this as a rare version as well. So there's a lot of different variations on the base item you choose to run with. Same thing goes for chest pieces. The 2 main chest pieces for rare items would be the Astral Plate for armor, which is a resistance providing armor based chest piece, which is incredibly good. This can roll armor modifiers and flat armor with HP. And then the energy shield version or option instead would be in the form of a Vol Regalia, which is actually what I am wearing in game right now. This is a pure energy shield piece, which again, the modifiers that I can roll on this would not have anything to do with armor at all, but instead provide me with the availability to roll energy shield modifiers instead. So in this section of this guide, we'll talk about the implicit and the synthesized implicit modifiers. Now, in the regular version of implicit modifiers, these pair of boots, they have fire and lightning rest. They are part of the baseline effect from two-tone boots, with the armor energy shield has fire and lightning rest in this version. And as you can see, these modifiers can then be rerolled with modifiers or orbs, such as Blessed Orb, which will randomize the numerical value of the implicit modifier of an item. So in my case, I have 11%, and if you look at them by holding down Alt, you'll see that the range is between 8 and 12. So if I use a Blessed Orb, that specific modifier rolled to 10, and now 12, and now we have perfect implicit on these pair of boots. So the implicit modifier here will remain on the item unless I'm corrupting them to that, which will potentially give it a new implicit modifier, or if I have a synthesized implicit on it, or if I use Eldritch currency. And Eldritch currencies such as the gloves that I'm wearing, they have the Eldritch implicit modifiers. These will straight up replace the current base implicit that is on the boots. Now, however, these boots do have another type of Conquer influence, which means they cannot have other Eldritch currency influences on it, which means that the implicit in this case is saved unless I use a corruption or through a Vol Orb or through the temple. So that is the implicit modifier. Synthesized implicit is a little bit more advanced. I will not talk too much about it. However, when it comes to synthesized bases such as this, as you can see on the icon up top, next to the Pandemonium Heart synthesized coral amulet name, you'll see that it has Heartseeker. This is an enchant through the oiling, through the cassia oils from a blight mechanic. And then below that, there is the implicit modifier saying increase damage whilst leeching. This modifier will remain there, and because of the item being synthesized, I am unable to make it influenced through other means, through Eldritch currency or the Conquer Exalted Orbs or any sort of kind, because it is a synthesized base. Therefore, it is locked in that type of influence, if you will. So that is the difference on the different types of synthesized modifiers. And if you're looking at something like Craft of Exile, like we talked about before, being the best tool, and I can look at something like a Coral Amulet, which is what I'm currently wearing, where there is a synthesized implicit modifiers, you can see here that the Coral Amulet in Craft of Exile have a different list of modifiers that you can roll on. All of these are explicit modifiers, and then there's some corruption modifiers that you can get in case you were to Vol Orbit. This would be able to change the item to change the implicit to any of these if you do happen to get that through corrupting it. And by looking at Craft of Exile and searching for the amulet base up here in the calculator, I will then have a Coral Amulet shown, and I can then scroll down to see what kind of corrupted implicit that could potentially land on the item. Next up would be the enchants, like I talked about. The oils on an amulet is in the form from the blight mechanic or cassia, which allows you to basically shove an amulet in and have different oils, which will then be able to anoint and then change that enchant to something else. Now, this is a little bit different when it comes to your gloves and helmet or boots, because these gloves and helmet and boots will be enchanted through the actual labyrinth, which you do from Act 3 in town going into the Aspirant's Plaza. Now, you can actually get that on the belt. As you can see here on my base build, I have enemies withered by -6% resistances. This comes from the fragment, extra super hard versions of the actual Uber Labyrinth, and the Uber Labyrinth is entered through the Offering of the Goddess. Now, the enchants is obviously separated from the actual implicit and does not actually count as an implicit modifier, but rather count as an actual enchant. These enchants can obviously be changed even if the item is corrupted, if you're using a tainted divine vessel, I believe it is. But there's an orb that you can use that you can bring with you into the lab to enchant corrupted items. Next up would be to explain influence modifiers such as Eldritch implicits, or in this case with my boots, I have influence modifiers from both Redeemer and Hunter, which is combined through using an Awakener orb, which I will not tackle in this video as it's more of an advanced crafting process, but I will be talking about influence modifiers. And before we do so, it's very important to again go back to Craft of Exile. And the reason we're going to go back to Craft of Exile is very simple. I'm going to take the two-tone boots that I am currently wearing, so we keep ourselves within the same kind of items that we're currently showing. And in the Craft of Exile calculator situation here, you can actually see the different modifiers that can roll on both the prefix modifiers that is over here and the suffix modifiers is over here. However, if the item is in fact influenced, you can then check on the little bar here saying influences, and let's say we add Hunter influence to it. In this case, we are now looking at the Craft of Exile through a pair of boots that is now influenced with a Hunter. This will now move the Hunter influence to the very top, and now I can see that the prefix rolls that can roll on this item is all of these modifiers, but also the Hunter influence modifiers as well, And the same thing with the suffixes. These are the base item modifiers that can roll on this specific item, and these are the hunter influence modifiers that can also roll on the item. And the same thing goes when it comes to Eldritch Currency, when it comes to the Searing Exarch or Eater of Worlds, for example. So if I am to go back and we go to Craft of Exile and we type in the two-tone boots, we'll be able to look at a situation where we can scroll all the way down to the Searing Exarch Implicits. This will also tell you the weight, which I'll cover later in this video. And these are the different implicit modifiers that can roll based on this specific Eldritch influence, and the Eater World can roll these specific modifiers, and the weight is on the right-hand side, which I'll show you how to calculate the odds of later. So this is basically a good way for you to determine what can and can't roll on an item, so you can determine if the pair of items that you're trying to craft or that you found, or you're trying to optimize or improve for your gear, you can actually double check them through Craft of Exile, and therefore determine if it's something you want to work with. Now that is the influence modifiers, a little quick TLDR of what they are and how they work. Very important to point out that if you're looking at, for example, the two-tone boots with the hunter influence, and you're looking to get a shaper modifier, that will not be able to roll at all unless the item has a shaper influence. Now, obviously, there are ways through Awakener Orb to make sure the item has both hunter influence and shaper, at which point it can roll both of them. But just make sure that you understand that process. So in Craft of Exile, there's another thing that you really should keep an eye out, and that is the item level restrictions. Now, there's a lot of things with item level that we need to tackle in this video as basic fundamental information that is very crucial to understand in this game. And the first one is the limitations that it brings to which tier of mods that can roll. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to take a look at, for example, a life roll. So if I click up the life roll, you can see here in the column that says item level. This will tell me what the minimum item level has to be on the item for this specific tier of the specific modifier to be able to roll on an item. In game, I am currently using item level 86. And if I look at item level, I can see that the highest item level required for any of these modifiers is actually 86, which is a tier 1 movement speed. But however, if you want to look at some lower item level versions of these items, you can simply click on the modifier that you want, for example, HP. And you can see that the highest tier of life requires item level 54. The lowest tier of life on these pair of boots will only require item level 1. So let's say that your item level on your boots is only level 50. It can actually only roll the tier 2 life, but not the tier 1 life. And the way to check the item level on an item is to hover over it, hold down Alt, and as you can see on the 4th row on the very top, it says item level 86. This is very important when it comes to crafting because some items will be better to craft on a lower item level base, and some items you definitely don't want to craft on unless you're looking at a higher item level. So always make sure you understand how the item level restrictions work in the game. Another couple of things when it comes to item level is obviously when it comes to the linking, and that's basically limited to, I believe it's level 50 or 55 to be able to create a 6-socketed item. 6-socketed item can then also become 6-linked, for example. And the only way to bypass if you have a unique item that dropped at a very low level and you can't get more than 3 sockets on it, for example, you can bypass that limitation by using things like a binding orb. And a binding orb will directly create a 4-link out of the item, but also upgrade a normal item to rare with a 4-linked socket. So this can actually bypass that rule by itself to create 4-linked items out of items that is too low item levels. Say you're leveling through the campaign, you have a really good rare item with some good stats that you want to keep. You drop an orb binding, but you can't get it up to 4 sockets. An orb binding can therefore save your ass. Outside of that, the Benchcraft is another thing to keep in mind when it comes to sorting the links. You can always go to your Benchcraft, which I'll go in game and show you real quick. And it's very important to point out a couple of things here, which we'll talk about when it comes to quality of items as well. And that is the fact that in the crafting bench, you can actually make sockets on the items through paying direct jewelers. For example, 10 jeweler orbs to get a 4 socket. You can also go to spending 5 fusings to get a 4-link. It is averagely cheaper to use these orbs yourself on the item, assuming it has 20% quality, than it is to use the Benchcraft. However, the Benchcraft will guarantee that specific outcome. So the quality, both armor scraps for armor pieces or blacksmith whetstones for weapons, actually increases the quality on these specific items. But if you read the gray text, it says that it has the, if you look at the fusing, sorry, in the gray text, you'll see that the item's quality increase the chance of obtaining more links. Same thing with the jewelers, the item's quality increases the chance of obtaining more sockets. So before you try to 6-socket or 6-link any of your items, make sure that it has the highest amount of quality, which is 20% quality through manually using the armor scraps of whetstones. And it can go all the way up to 30% through betrayal encounters or even perfect fossils, which rolls between, actually out of them, which rolls between 15 and 30% as well, if you decide to go that route. Outside of this, there's a couple other things you can do, which is kind of neat when it comes to the benchcraft, and that is actually looking at coloring items. So let's look at something that is rather popular in the current state of the game, and that is the Covenant chess piece. Now, the Covenant chess piece has a restriction of a 134 intelligence, and in most of these builds, you want to use more than 2 or 3 sockets that are off color. And when I say off color, that means that intelligence is always making the blue sockets main colors. That means that green and red are considered off colors. So how can you then determine if you're going to sit and spam some chromatic orbs till you get the correct colors, or if you're going to use the Benchcraft, which allows you to choose between guaranteeing 1, 2, even up to 3 different other colors, which would then be the cheapest option? If you go to Google and you search for Varici Calculator, you can get access to this GitHub, which allows you to actually add the information without gems in it, which in this case would be a 6-socket item, and it has 134 intelligence required, so we're going to put in requirement 134. Now, if I want 3, say 1 red and 3 green, and the remaining 2 sockets to be blue, I can just add that in the desired colors and click on calculate, and this will tell me that the cheapest way to get these colors is not to use the chromatic, but rather use the Benchcraft with 1 green recipe. With that will cost you least amount of chromatics to hit these colors. And this will obviously change. Say I do this and add 3 in here, it will tell me to again use the 3 green. But if I change it down to 2 greens with 4 blue, now it's cheaper for me in the long run to just use the chromatic orbs to hit those colors. So this is a really neat trick you can do to actually make sure you get the correct colors that you're looking for. Another neat trick with the this approach would actually be things like, let's say we look at Acuity as an example. So if you look at a series Acuity as a pair of gloves, they have 100 strength required in a 4-socket situation. Now let's say that you are actually looking to get 4 blue out of this. This will now tell you that you're supposed to spend about 1,400 chromes by using the 3 blue recipe to hit these colors. This is something you should absolutely not do. And the solution to that is very simple. So I'm going to take a pair of gloves and show you another trick you can do with the jewelers. And I'm going to take these this blue pair of gloves, which is 54 intelligence. So let's say that we are looking to get 4 red out of this. It will tell me that I have to spend 1,000 chromatics to hit these. But instead, what you can do with the Benchcraft is to trick it with a jeweler approach. This will tell me that the drop rate or the chromatic to hit 1 red, for example, which we can just verify like this, it will tell me that there's a 29% chance of me hitting that. So by making sure that we know that this is way too much currency to spend, we can then use this trick. Socketing the items in and then making it 2 red sockets, which cost 25 chromatics. And you can see that I have 2 red. Instead of actually making it 4 red through spamming chromatics, we will now make the item 2 sockets. This will make it so the 2 first sockets of the item remains, which in this case I've already made red, and it will have 2 sockets being red. Then I'll make it 3 sockets, and based on the information that we found out by doing this, there's a 29% chance every time I make it 3 sockets that it will turn into a red color. And I can make it back to 2 sockets, and then back to 3 sockets, and I can rinse repeat this because I know that there's a 29% that I'll get a red color in here, and then the same process for the 4th color, which is again a 29% chance that I do this to hit a red color or a green color in this case as well, which will be vastly cheaper than to just spam the chromatics. So this is a neat trick for the 4-socket or even 3-socket items to make sure you get the off colors that you're looking for without spending too much currency. And understanding these things is allowing you to minimize the cost of what you're doing in the game. It also allows you to make more profit if you decide to profit craft and whatnot. So understanding this is very important. Now, another thing when it comes back to reverting it into the boots we talked about and looking at the anatomy of items is the Benchcrafted Modifier. Now, there's two different limitations and restrictions when it comes to a Benchcrafted Modifier. As you can see, it has the same color as the enchant, but if you look at the mod description, it says Master Crafted Prefix Modifier, and it then is a 70 plus to HP, or maximum life. Benchcrafts like this can only have one modifier that is benchcrafted on any single item, and the only exception to this rule is items that has a metacraft called multi-bench, referred to as multi-bench. And if you then search on the craft bench, you can see that it can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, which requires to be found the recipe through the Putrid Cloister map. This will allow you to put this specific modifier, which is an actually suffix modifier. This will allow you to put 2 additional modifiers on an item as well. This does cost 2 divine orbs, so it's rather expensive, hence the name, hence it's referred to as a metacraft. Outside of that, we're going to talk about a little bit about fractured modifiers and the limitations and restrictions that fractured modifiers have. And that is something we'll find on the gloves that I'm wearing. Now, these fractured modifiers is the golden or dark brown colored life craft that I have on this pair of glove. It is not considered a craft in itself. It is a fractured modifier. Now, a fractured modifier is in a sense a modifier that can never be removed from the item. No matter what I do to this item, that modifier will still remain there, which makes it a very good item modifier to lock when you're looking for very specific crafts. So in my case for these gloves, I wanted to have essence minion damage, and I wanted a prefix open to benchcraft on, which allowed me to craft them very, very easily by just spamming essences till I had 30% minion damage, and then removing the third prefix if I had to, because the life craft would remain there no matter how many times I would be crafting this. We have a couple of these gloves in here already that I've crafted for profit earlier in the league, which I should actually lower. And in this case, you can see that they're very easy to craft because of the fact that you're locking that modifier in place. Now, this is very common for a lot of different item crafts in the game, but understanding how the fractured modifier in itself works is that it's basically just locked there. You can't remove it. Outside of this, we're going to talk about a couple of other things. That is the difference between a local modifier and a global modifier. And that is a little bit harder to explain, but I'll try my best. So we're going to look at my one that I have for this specific character. And this one says that I have increased spell damage as well as increased cast speed at the very top of the item list. Now, these modifiers are global because of the fact that they give my character or myself increased spell damage and increased cast speed. But modifiers that are local are a little bit different. Those are modifiers that would specifically apply to the item that it's linked in. So a local modifier would be found on mostly physical damage dealing weapons or even elemental damage dealing weapons, but mostly hitting weapons, right? And there are other local modifiers such as armor, energy shield, or evasion. So if we're going to take a look at the chest piece that I have, and in here at the second modifier from the top, you'll see that there is or actually the very first modifier, it says plus 30 to maximum energy shield. Now this modifier is called Radiating. This is a flat energy shield that would apply to my actual chest piece. And this modifier would then be scaled by the quality of the item. In my case, it's 20%, and therefore add 30 flat energy shield plus 20% of that to myself in the end. So a difference between a local and global modifiers can be very hard to determine or verify unless you have more experience with the game. And this comes with more experience of playing the game and looking at modifiers. You will be able to tell these very, very easily. But understanding the difference is very important. So we can take a look at something like the shield, which has increased damage for spells or spell damage. Again, these again are global modifiers. And if I then look at some of the leveling gear that I might have access to, this modifier here on the axiom says increased fire damage to spells or added damage to spells. These are global modifiers that adding specifically to spells. And then you have something like the Bright Beak, which has increased physical damage. And this physical damage increase is applying to the actual weapon. And then the weapon's damage is what your character will be using. The increased attack speed is the same thing there. With the critical strike chance, it's very important to point out as well. As you can see on the item, it has a blue text of critical strike at the very top saying 6.25%. The increased critical strike chance is there a local modifier. Otherwise, it would say something in the lines of increased global critical strike chance, which I don't think I have available to show you right now. There is one here saying increased critical strike chance for spells through a jewel, which is a global modifier applying to all my spells, and the sense that it cannot apply directly to the jewel itself. So again, the global and local modifiers can be a bit hard to understand, but I hope this helps you guide it a little bit along the road to get to the point of understanding this in a better way. There is a couple of other modifiers that we do need to tackle, and these are in the form of Delve and Incursion modifiers. So we're going to head all the way back to Craft of Exile, and in this case we have our two-tone boots with Hunter Influence, but I'm going to scroll all the way down to the Incursion modifier list here. This will show me a random list of modifiers depending on the item I'm looking at. In this case, I'm looking at a pair of boots. And the Incursion modifiers, they are modifiers that actually exclusively drops from the Incursion encounters. This is Alva, also called the Temple Master. Then items that drop with these modifiers can have these modifiers, obviously. However, if you decide to craft on an item that has this modifier and whatever craft method you are using would remove that modifier, you are unable to get that modifier back through normal means. This basically means that the Incursion modifiers needs to be kept on the item you're crafting, or it will be lost. Otherwise, you'd have to fracture it or imprint, which we'll talk about in more advanced crafting guides further down the road in this series. And the same thing goes for Delve modifiers. So Delve modifiers is the same thing as Incursion, but obviously they drop in the Delve encounters through the mine. And this we have socket of minion gems, we have damage that hits against cursed enemies, mana regen, or damage recouped as mana. If a pair of boots like this, the two-tone boots, would drop with these modifiers, they can be crafted as long as you don't craft them so that modifier goes away or that modifier will be lost forever. So that is how Delve and Incursion modifiers work. And influence modifiers we already tackled earlier, and the quality explanation has also been tackled. So we're going to move all the way into the corrupted implicit modifiers that we talked about earlier and take that to the next level. And that is the fact that you can actually not benchcraft modifiers on a corrupted item. So I'm going to show you that right now by taking out a Vol Orb, and we'll take a pair of gloves. So we'll take the gloves we were playing around with earlier. And as you can see here, I can change this life craft to whatever I want. I can change it to any other prefix because this item has one open prefix, one open suffix. And, you know, it has different modifiers that allows me, prevents me from rolling these or benchcrafting them. However, if I were to corrupt it, I can no longer change the benchcraft. It is impossible for me to change the benchcraft whatsoever. However, though, I am still able to change the sockets or links through paying the same amount of jewelers as before, but also adding the same amount of cost in the form of Vol Orbs. So if you have a corrupted item and you want to get it for sockets, you are actually able to do so through the benchcraft, but it will cost you the equal amount of Vol Orbs as it does with jewelers or fusings. The other thing you can do with corrupted items is obviously using some basic currency or exotic currency called tainted blacksmith stones or tainted armor scraps, or even the tainted fusings and tainted jewelers and tainted chromatics. There's so many different types of tainted currency you can use, and these will work and basically work unpredictably. So in this case, if I were to use this unpredictably reforging the colors, I get 3 different off colors despite the item having full intelligence requirement. So it's just completely random of how this will work. Whereas the jeweler orb will unpredictably either remove or add a sockets. In this case, I got a 2, and now I got 3. Now I got 4 sockets by using a couple of tainted jewelers, which you can use on corrupted items. Same thing with the fusing. If I use this, it has 2 sockets. I will either get 3 or 0. In this case, I got 0 links out of using the tainted. The current quality on the item is 0%. If I use a tainted armor scrap on a corrupted item, I can get up to 28% even, which is pretty crazy. I actually can go up to a 29 even by using a tainted armor scrap on a actual corrupted item. So those are the limitations and possibilities that you can work with when it comes to corrupted items in general. Now, I did mention earlier that we're going to keep this as easy to consume as possible. I know I'm speeding through this video. If you think this is too fast for you, make sure you check out the written guide that I'll be making, and which will be linked in the descriptions below when it's ready. It might be easier for you to consume and learn from. But there will be 2 more things I want to tackle in this video, and one is the bench blocking methods, and the other is a modifier weight explanation. These are a little bit more advanced things, but I wanted them to be in this video because I think they're very important to have an understanding of what it means when you move forward into crafting for the advanced processes. So first things first, I want to talk about modifier weight value before talking about bench blocking because they both kind of connected. So we're going to paint up a picture where we are actually crafting an intelligence body armor such as a Val Regalia. We're going to assume that we already have percent energy shield and that we have flat energy shield and that we have the hybrid modifier. This means that there are currently 3 prefixes on the item, and we're going to assume that we already have life regeneration as a modifier on this specific chest piece. Now, what we're looking to do is we're looking to have a possibility for us to benchcraft a resistance roll, but we also want to fill up that second suffix slot before we do that by simply using an Exalted Orb. And we're going to be explaining now how this works for you to determine whether or not what to bench block before you do so. And to understand that, you have to understand the weighted value. So I'm going to bring up a juicy little calculator here. And in this case, you can see the weighted mods in this column in Craft of Exile. It will tell me the total weight of pool modifiers weight that they can roll on this item. So the total weight on suffixes, which is the only thing that can roll on this specific example, would be 58,200. However, we already have one of the modifier tiers from the regenerate flat life per second, which means I can already remove 11,000 from this pool because that can no longer roll. Now we have 47,200 weight left in the pool that can roll. So if I were to Exalt Slam my current item in this specific example, the odds of me to get something that I would want would have to be compared to a pool of 47,200. So we're going to pretend that I'm okay with any tier of cold, fire resistance, or even chaos resistance or lightning rest, and then look at the odds of me hitting any of those. And the way you calculate that is very simple. I would take the total pool of all the chaos rest, which is a bunch of tiers, but we said we're fine with any tier. That would be 1,500 plus another 8,000 plus another 8,000 plus another 8,000. So any resistance roll of any tier will have a weight of 25,500. This would then be divided by the total weight of remaining pools on the item, which like we talked about, was 47,200. By dividing this, I can see that I have a 54% chance that when I Exalt Slam this specific item of an item level that can roll all of these mods, which would be item level 86, I can then hit one of those resistance rolls. That's a pretty good odd, right? However, if we say that we don't want chaos resistance and we only want the top 3 tiers of any of the elemental rest, we can see that that's only 3,000. This would be 3,000 here as well, and it would be 3,000 here. So that would be a total weight of 9,000. Then divide that by the total weight of pool, and that gives us a 19% chance of hitting any of those specific tiers of resistances for us to be happy. Now, knowing this information, we can then utilize the knowledge we have of understanding how the weighted pools work to create a bench block before we do the slam. Obviously, with this information, it would be very, very smart of us to block the modifier that has the highest weighted value. If you look at the list, we can now see that that would actually be the intelligence roll. Now, it is fair to point out that intelligence in this specific example would actually be a good modifier to have in most cases, but for the sake of it, we don't want intelligence in this example. So we're going to benchcraft a lowest tier of intelligence, doesn't matter which one you do, and I'm going to take away 9,000 from this pool now. We also already came to the understanding that I'm only okay with top 3 rolls of the resistance rolls, which had a total weight of 9,000. Now I would take 9,000 and divide with a new number, which would be 38,200, and see that instead of 19% chance of hitting these modifiers, I would have a 23.56% chance of actually reaching that specific modifier. So that is how you create bench blocks. Now, bench blocks can be utilized in many other scenarios, which I'll tackle more in depth in the advanced crafting guides, which will be covered in the series that I'm working on. But these are more of a simple way of utilizing bench blocking and understanding why and doing these calculations yourself. You don't have to calculate the percent chance. You can just look at it and see, hey, I'm going to block intelligence before I slam it. It's going to be an increased chance of actually hitting what I want. And that's all you need to do. I'm a big fan of actually knowing the exact numbers of these things, and therefore I want to do that. Now, I do want to mention a quick thing that if I didn't have the life regen modifier, obviously this would be the one you want to block. But if I look at the crafted list of modifiers and then do Control F and search for life per second, I can then verify that the life per second craft does not exist as a bench craft. Therefore, I cannot bench block that specific modifier. So in this example, in reality, if you don't have this modifier, this would be the mod you'd most often see. So this is a way for you to verify by using Craft of Exile to see which mods you should block, when and where, and depending on the choices you make and how you decide to craft an item. Now, obviously, this video guide series starts off with a basic 101 where I'm basically just showing you and teaching you the different limitations and restrictions of for different items and explaining the anatomy of items and whatnot. And I know that I might have gone a little bit too fast. If that's the case, please do check out the written guide. Link to the descriptions below when it's ready. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to come by my Twitch stream. I stream 6 days a week. So ask any questions you have there, and I'll try to tackle as many of you as possible to make sure you get this information. And I'm going to start going into more advanced crafting processes in the future videos, such as going through essence crafting, fossil crafting, meta crafting, harvest crafting, beast crafting, elders crafting, veil crafting, woke crafting, import crafting, overdominance crafting, fracture crafting, split crafting, profit crafting, rogue crafting, and also adding a little bit of a trade guide. So there's a lot of videos that's going to come with this series. Let's not prolong this video anymore. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and I hope you guys enjoy the video. So till then, next time, stay safe and keep rocking.